Good morning, everyone. Can you all hear me okay? I hope everybody's doing all right this morning and staying safe and healthy. So thank you for your time this morning. I'm looking forward to giving you this talk. So as Kara mentioned, I'm the conservator at the Indiana State Library. And I'm going to go ahead and start here. All right. So before I get really into it, I always like to start right off the bat with resources, because for a lot of people that I interact with, they've never worked with a conservator, they've never had any interaction with a conservator. A lot of people don't even really know what it is that I do, and how the field really works. So I'd like to start off with this. Is we actually in the Midwest we have two organizations that sort of represent conservation. We have our national one, which is the one at the top, called the American Institute for Conservation. And I believe they've changed the URL a few times, but if you Google American Institute for Conservation, it's usually the first thing that comes up. I think it's culturalheritage.org now. They've changed it a few times, but it's pretty easy to find. The other one at the bottom is a regional organization that it represents conservators throughout the Midwest region. I'm actually the president of it, for at least for the rest of this year. It's called the Midwest Regional Conservation Guild, and it represents all of the conservators throughout the Midwest region of the U.S. Throughout the U.S., different regions of the country have different regional organizations, and MRCG is the one for the Midwest region. So those are the two organizations that represent conservation throughout, well, at least for the Midwest region and nationally. Okay, so start to get into the talk here. So two quick topics that I'm gonna hit on today is an introduction to the field over what is our conservation. I like to start that off just to get everybody on the same page. So, and then I'm going to talk about what it is that I do in the lab and the way our program within the library, our conservation program in the library works. So, to start off, what is our conservation? My goal is, as a conservator, sort of several-fold. My first goal is artwork is to prevent artwork from getting damaged, and then my second goal is to repair damage when it does happen. I didn't put this in here, but we have a sort of a kind of a joking acronym we like to use in the field. We call it the AARP acronym, which stands essentially for Assess, Advise, Repair, and Prevent, which essentially means that my job is first to look at the pieces. I advise on options. I advise on repair, and then I'm also in charge of preventative damage. And I'll go into that in a little more detail a little further on. So I get this a lot because there is a very strong distinction between what is restoration and what is conservation, and the two sort of interact with each other, but they're very two different things. So I'd like to quickly define this. So restoration primarily focuses on repair of damage, and really there can be done by anyone. And I mean, anyone from hobbyists to mechanics. I mean, there is no real oversight or guidelines for it. And often when you deal with restoration, there's usually not really any kind of documentation or disclosure done on what was actually done to the piece. Conservation, which is very different, we focus on both prevention and repair. Everything that I do or any competent conservator does has to be reversible. There's also guidelines in terms of longevity of the repair, and everything I do has to be documented before and after I do it. There's also a strict ethical code that I'm required to follow as part of the AIC's ethics guidelines. And usually any conservator who's come into the field in the last 30 years or so has gone through one of several graduate conservation programs in North America or Europe, and there really aren't that many. So most conservators now have come into the field through the academic route. as opposed to before then came in through, say, the apprentice side. Most people have come in through the academic route now. Okay, so conservation, like many fields, there is no such thing as a conservator that does everything. That's usually a red flag right off the bat if somebody says they do it all. The way the field is generally divided up is into three main areas. We have paintings, object conservation, and paper. And like most fields, we don't cross. So as a paper conservator, I will only work on paper. I don't work on objects. I won't go anywhere near a painting. I only work on paper-based materials. But within these three categories, there are subcategories. And I'm going to go through these pretty quick so that you guys have a good idea of the way the field is divided up in case you ever need conservation work. So within painting, there is what most people see as traditional painting conservation. You're cleaning a painting on canvas, traditional stuff, wood panel paintings, things like that. But the other part that a lot of people don't realize is that painting conservators are often also responsible for time-based media and installations. And so if you work in a museum like the Museum of Modern Art or any other or large museums with art collections, usually the painting conservation group would be in charge of things like installation and time-based media. Okay. Object conservation encompasses quite a bit, actually. It could be anything from wood, metal, bone, feathers. It could really be anything that's not considered paper or painting. And so it's a pretty wide range. These are the furniture conservators at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. Object conservators also work on textile conservation. Object conservators also work on metals. This is the USS Monitor, Civil War ironclad. I have a close friend who's the conservator. This is at the Mariners Museum in Norfolk, Virginia. This is the turret from the USS Monitor. He's a metals conservator. So object conservators really they do anything from ethnographic to archaeological to really quite a bit. It's quite a range. And then going into paper conservation, there are generally considered three main categories or three main subcategories of paper conservation. You have books and bound materials would be considered to be one category. The second category would be photographs and photographic materials. And the third would be really anything that's not bound, that's not a book or a photo. And generally that's how things are divided up and how they're taught. And so here we have things that are in the book, in the paper conservation category that we would deal with. We have posters. This was an Indiana State Library Centennial poster. Watercolors, drawings. This is a charcoal drawing by Floyd Hopper of the construction of the library in the 30s. Documents. This is a contrary to, even though it may not seem like it, sometimes paper conservators actually get things that aren't actually paper. This is a vellum document, a presidential document of President Andrew Johnson. Photographic materials. Okay, so that's sort of the quick run through of how the field is divided up. So I'm going to go through quickly what I do, how the lab operates at the library. So this is the conservation lab. In the picture, it looks a little bigger than it actually is in real life. It's longer. You have to pardon the fisheye style photo, but tried to get all the equipment in there so you guys could see as much of sort of what we do and what some of the equipment is. So I want to go through quickly what I see on a regular basis. Now I'm going to sort of preface this with a little disclaimer. Not everything I'm going to show here was in the state library. These are pictures of things that I've seen over the years that I've kind of built into a little bit of a library of common preservation problems. So this is a collection of stuff that I picked up over the years. So Quick things that I do see regularly. Obviously, there's water damage. This is what we call cockling. This is what happens when books get wet, and I hope none of you ever have to see this, but this is very common. Many of you have probably seen this on your daily work, dog-earing pages. These are things that I see do come in. A lot of these things are fixable in some contexts, but a lot of these are permanent forms of damage. Broken spines caused by physical damage of copy machines. Hopefully, the field is moving towards more copy machine friendly, book-friendly copy machines, but this is still very common. To fix damage like this usually involves taking a book apart. And I hope none of you never need to see this, never need to work with that. Physical damage, tears and holes and losses. I love this photo because this shows, this is a great example of pressure over time and my distaste for rubber bands. What happens when you leave a rubber band on a book over a very, very long period of time, this is what you get. My favorite part is what I call my office supplies section. These are paper clips, but what happens when you have paper clips that are left on paper for a long time and exposed to water? This is what you get. This also goes for staples and other metal objects that interact with paper. Rust in paper is extremely difficult to get out. It can sometimes be done, but it's very difficult to undo. But paper clips don't necessarily have to rust to cause damage. This is what you end up with paper clips and pressure. You end up with fractured paper. We have insect damage and mold and other forms of biological damage. And then what I call the bane of my existence, which is tapes and adhesives. I spend about half of my time, sometimes more, taking tape off of things. On the left, you see what happens with tape, cellophane tape, otherwise known as Scotch tape, or that's left on paper over years and years and years, and you get this kind of yellowish stain that gets crusty. And a lot of this is reversible in some contexts, but it does leave staining behind that can't be undone. And then on the other side, you have low adhesive, forms of tape and adhesives that really aren't even considered too sticky that can still cause damage. You can see what happens with Post-it notes that are left in paper for years on end. This is what you get. And then we get into an area that isn't really, that is a sort of a big area of the field of just things that fall apart on their own, that aren't really caused by any active form of damage. It's just things that are unstable in their own right. What you're seeing here is very common, especially on earlier pages from the, say the 19th, around the turn of the century, last turn of the century and older. This is what we call, this is what's called iron gall ink. And this, up until around the turn of the century, was considered to be the most popular transcription ink in human history. It was sort of a kitchen ink, I suppose. It was something you made yourself, and there were hundreds of different recipes. But the moral of the story is that it's not stable, and over time, and I could spend a whole talk just talking about iron gall ink, but what ends up happening over time is that it literally eats its way through the paper and causes the paper to become acidic. And then what you end up with are things that look like this, which is it just literally eats its way right through. Areas where there are large concentrations of the ink, you end up with just holes. And eventually you end up, and you see this kind of halo around the ink. What also ends up happening is the pH level of the paper drops as well, and the paper just essentially crumbles away, and you end up with this. And this is very common in libraries throughout Europe that have a lot older collections, but I see this a lot. In fact, we have a fair amount of our collection has this in it, and there is ways to remedy this, but it's very involved. And then we have other kinds of unstable material. The degradation of cellulose acetate film. This is called channeling. This is what happens when the different layers of the film shrink at different rates, and you end up with this kind of phenomenon, which makes it almost impossible to fix. So those are the most common preservation problems that I see that come into the lab on a regular basis. So what I want to go through is just quickly the type of work and sort of how we do things in the lab. And at least all preservation labs kind of operate slightly different, but the way we do it, I'm a lab of one, and so I have to kind of coordinate the workflow and try to keep all of our divisions happy in some context. I can't just focus all my time on one collection or one division. I have to kind of give everybody the option of bringing things. We operate very much as a service lab where people bring things to have them fixed, and then we send them back. So a few things about the type of work that we do. A lot of the work that we do isn't actually repair. It's more of it falls into more of the rehousing. And obviously, as librarians, you know that the first line of defense is how you store your pieces. And so a lot of what we get, we have in terms of bound material and loose material. One of the first things that we do, and one of the most common things we do, is encapsulations. And what you're seeing here is the conservation intern Lily using we have a machine called an ultrasonic encapsulator, which is a very fancy machine that really all it does is it takes Mylar and welds it together. And so what you're seeing here, and this image will show up a little later in conjunction with a project, but what you're seeing here is her making a sleeve for a map. And we spend a lot of time making sleeves and folders for things. And this is a large part of our workflow. The other part of our workflow is boxes and folders. And what you're seeing here is a couple of the staff we have a machine that very fancy, overly expensive machine that really all it does is make creases in board. And this is how we make boxes. And there's a lot of names for this machine, but I call it the crimper, or it's otherwise known as the Hollinger folder face box maker. But really all it does is it makes creases. And so here you see Lily again making a box for a book. There are a lot of different ways that you can make boxes, but what we do here, because a lot of our collection is not really, we're a closed stack library, so a lot of the boxes don't necessarily need to look as pretty. So we do a lot of boxes made out of blue board, acid-free blue board corrugated. Which takes us about 30 minutes or so to make a box, but this is a lot of what we do in terms of box making. And so all of the staff throughout all the divisions in the library each have one or two people, designated people that are trained to make boxes, and they come up on their own when they need to, and that's what they do. They make boxes for their collections. So which leaves me a little bit more time to work on some of the more complex projects. So one of the other things that I'm in charge of is, as I said from the beginning, is preventative damage, which also involves doing things like environmental monitoring, disaster planning and response, things like that. And then when we do have large disasters, I'm in charge of overseeing the effort to stabilize collections. So this was a small flood, or I wouldn't say a flood, a small leak we had in 2019 that came from an HVAC issue. We had a couple of dozen pieces that were wet and damaged, and here you can see us doing some salvage on that while we dry everything out. This was in our primarily our government documents collection. So, but this kind of shows that my job isn't just fixing things; it's also mitigating disasters and preventative. We actually just a few months ago updated our disaster plan, which I encourage you all to look at in each of your own collections. Okay, so the way our projects that come to the lab are organized is in terms of two categories. We have single item projects, and then we have large scale multi-item projects. And the way all conservators within collection institutions all kind of deal with their workflow a little bit differently. The way I do it, and the way we've arranged things within the state library, Indiana State Library, is each division gets sort of a priority year to decide a priority project for that year, and then they get sort of to pick the projects that they want for the year, and they get first dibs priority. And then it doesn't mean that other divisions can't send pieces to the lab, but they get put sort of as sort of second priority, and when I can fit them in, I fit them in. And this is sort of the way we do it. In this way, every division within our library sort of gets to deal with their projects. And I strongly encourage long-term planning, and this has allowed for every division to kind of think ahead in advance over what they consider to be the priorities within the collection. I am one person, and I can only fix things so quickly. And so obviously I would love to fix everything, but that's just not physically possible. And so this allows each division to sort of think about what is considered to be the highest priority. As a conservator, I don't know, it's not possible for me to determine context and priority of collections. I see material, I see for me, two books, that are damaged are equal to me, even though one may not be as important to the other. I can't determine that. So I depend very much on the librarians that oversee their collections to decide what is considered to be a priority piece. And so that's the way the workflow happens within our conservation department. So I'm going to go through a few of the pieces that just so you can see the way some of the work happens. I'm going to go a little bit into the detail of how the treatments happen. So this was a piece that came up last year. This was a single item piece that was discovered, and we are going through our collection, and there's been a lot of really great finds. I'd love to know why this ended up in Indiana, but this is an 1885 journal, French newspaper showing the construction of the Statue of Liberty before it was given to the United States. And what you're seeing here, this was discovered in the collection and deemed of high priority and very important. We don't know how many copies are left of this. This was obviously prior repairs were attempted. It was in pretty bad shape. What you're seeing is rubber cement. Those repairs in the back, that's rubber cement and paper as a form of repair. Best intentions, of course, from prior librarians. I've learned to not question decisions of people from 100 years ago, but this is what I was given. So the way we determined that the first step would be is I need to undo all of the prior repairs, which involves taking all of that staining out and taking all of that rubber cement off. And this was done on what we have, what you're seeing underneath, that's called a suction platen, which is a very high power downdraft table. Think of it like an air hockey table in reverse. And this allows me to pull things out of paper. This is a very common tool in conservation labs. What you're seeing here is me applying acetone, which we deemed was the solvent that would allow me to pull out that staining. What you're seeing here is I'm pulling out the staining with acetone with a pipette on a suction table, on a suction platen. And after this is what you're seeing on the left is after all the staining and all that rubber cement is taken out, what I'm left with is all of the is now a sheet that's stain free. You have to remember is that repairs are generally not put on pieces arbitrarily. There's a reason people fix things, and once you undo the old repairs, everything opens back up again. All the tears are opened back up, all the pieces come apart. And so this is that newspaper. After all the repairs are taken off, what I'm left with is a lot of pieces. And so one by one, each of the pieces was washed to remove any soluble compounds in the paper. And because we have that sheet had a lot of holes, what you're seeing now is I'm now filling in those holes with repulp paper, which is a very fancy way of saying I take paper that's a close match and I run it through a blender and I bring it back to a kind of a watery, pulpy solution, and I apply that to the areas that are missing on a suction table. On what you're seeing, that little sheet underneath is called Rime, which is spun polyester. And it's sort of thinking, if any of you have ever done paper making, it's sort of like paper making in reverse. I'm pulling the water out. I'm applying the solution to the hole, and it's pulling the water down through the hole and filling in all those holes. And it's called a pulp fill. And slowly I put all the pieces back where they're supposed to be, because now I have lots and lots of little pieces. So I'm slowly putting everything back in its correct spot. And now under the microscope, I go in and I try to clean up some of the lines in areas where it's pretty obvious what things are. Conservators do have to follow certain ethics rules, which means I'm not going to just take artistic liberty and paint in areas where we don't know what's gone. But usually anytime there's in painting, there's usually a lot of curatorial discussion that happens in terms of how much I should put back, how much I should leave there. Generally, we leave things kind of as like a neutral tone, but in the case of the print, it was pretty clear what was missing. So a lot of this was just connecting lines. And this is what looks like now. After all the repairs and after all the holes are filled, and because of the display considerations that were curatorial display considerations, we intentionally left the sheets separated for both storage and future exhibit. And so this is because the most important part was the image of the construction of the Statue of Liberty. That sheet was left loose from the others. This has gone back into the collection now. We're still trying to determine what to do with it, what we're going to do with it, but it's pretty unique. It's a pretty neat piece. So that was sort of an example of some of the high priority single item pieces that come up. I'm going to talk quickly about some of the larger scale projects. I started at the library in 2019, and when I started that first year, our manuscripts division was given, that was their year, and our former manuscripts librarian decided that her priority project for that year was a large-scale panoramic photo project, which consisted of about 200, I think it was around 250 panoramic photos of Indianapolis, turn of the century Indianapolis from various timeframes, which I believe was late 19th, early 20th century panoramics, and they were pretty all over the place in terms of content. Here we have one of downtown Indianapolis from I believe it was the 30s. This is a stenography plant. I don't remember where this was. There were quite a number of these. This is downtown again. This one was one of my favorite. It's a police station with all the police on their bicycles, right in front of a police station. We never did quite figure out where this was, but I believe this was around definitely early 20th century. We were actually in discussion with the local police to try to determine this one. We never did quite figure this out, but it was a very cool photo. So there were about 200 of these, and they ranged in damage from almost perfect condition to really terrible shape, and where lots of tears, lots of tape, a lot of them were rolled and needed to be unrolled and flattened. And so this is actually, we have a really cool little video of that repair that I'm going to actually ask Lisa to transfer over here. We did a time lapse of one of the repairs of a photo, so you can see what was involved in just fixing one. And here I am putting down Japanese repair tissue on the back to fix all the tears. Lots and lots of tears. Photos are very tricky because you can never make things entirely go away. Oh yeah, this was the policeman's one. And then I'm going in afterwards on the front with gelatin to kind of reseal up the emulsion layer. And this is the photo after it's fixed. So you can see the amount of work it took to just do one. So all right, so Lisa, I'll have you pass me back there. Thanks. Give it a moment here. All right, so that was 2019, and we fixed it and ended up being, I think it was around 250 photos. It was quite a number of them, and that was most of the year. Let's see here. Okay. Oh, here we go. So last year, the priority shifted from our manuscripts division to our Indiana division, and one of our Indiana division oversees our map collection, which has seen very little attention over the years and needed a substantial amount of work. And maps, I do a lot of maps, and maps are very diverse in terms of complexity and size. And so working with our Indiana librarian, Monique Howell, we went through and decided, and it made it a little trickier dealing with COVID and my limited amount of time that I could spend in the lab. But we went through and decided, I believe we came up to a conclusion of about around 9 to 10 maps that were really, really important, meaning we as far as we knew, we had the only copy left in existence. They couldn't be handled. They were really rare. They were significantly important. And so I'm going to go through a few of these, and then I'm going to show you what was involved in fixing one. So this is a map of Knightsville, and I don't remember the exact date for this one off the top of my head. But as you could see, it had a lot of pieces. You've got sheets adhered to it. The edge was silked, meaning they sewed silk all the way around. It was glued to fabric. So it had a lot of complexity due to a lot of pieces, and all of those pieces needed to come apart before I could fix one, and each one of them needed to be fixed on its own. So a lot of this is disassembly before I could even deal with the repair of the map. And this is what it looks like now with just the main map. I had to take all the silk off, fill in all the holes. It also got washed and repaired, and here are all the pieces too. And each one of these are now all in one sleeve together, so it could be used by researchers without risking causing the map more damage. Oh, that went too fast. So this is a plat map from 1837. What was unique about this one was missing. This one was actually missing quite a number of pieces. What was interesting about this one, and I don't have an image for this, unfortunately, to show you guys, but what we found out is if it's hard to see from the corners, but this map was also glued to fabric too, and that was very common of 19th century maps to give them more structure was to glue them to fabric. What we realized is that the fabric, there was actually quite a bit of information on the back of it that was covered up by the fabric. So once the fabric came off and I was able to fix the map, this is what it looks like now after all the holes were filled. And you can see on the right side with the other image, that was what we couldn't see before. So all that information on the back was covered up, which was very interesting to our maps librarian. Okay, so this one, this is a very common style of map that was very popular in the mid-19th century, and I'm going to show a few examples of these. This was a map style, and don't let the image elude you. This was probably about 5 by 6 feet in size. It's a very, very large map. These maps were very popular from around 1850 to around 1870, and we've got a lot of these in the collection, and I'm pretty confident most of you guys too. These maps were also glued to fabric. Often the edges were silked or fabric was glued to the edges. A lot of that was for protection. A lot of that was for aesthetic. In the case of this map, book cloth was glued to the edges at some point. What makes these maps really complex and which is really tricky is that generally they were also varnished, and usually it was sort of a tree sap style varnish. And we've done a lot of testing on maps of this style, and they all kind of show the same chemically the same varnish. But these are very complex, and we see these a lot in libraries throughout the U.S. And what makes these so tricky is that before you can fix the map, you've got to take all the varnish off. Clearly, there's a lot missing. There are a lot of holes, which means that the moment I take the fabric off, all of those pieces open up again, and it becomes a jigsaw puzzle. And it becomes a little bit of a tricky thing trying to keep everything in its correct spot throughout the whole course of the treatment. And I'm going to go through how these were treated so you can see the whole sequence. So this one was one of the larger ones, and in terms of treatment, this is what it looks like now. And although it doesn't look like it in the image because I seam them up together, we're intentionally not putting the pieces back together again because we don't have a way of storing them as a full-size map. So we're leaving during the course of the treatment of these maps, the pieces separate, and we intentionally leave the panels separate. So these maps are not one single sheet of paper. They're usually several sheets of paper that are adhered together. And what you're seeing here is the map after repair, after the varnish is taken off, after it's washed and treated, and it's now lined onto Japanese tissue. Here's another one. This was the last one we did at the end of the year. At some point, somebody decided to cut this one up into smaller pieces and glue it to fabric. This one is also quite large. The areas that they cut up didn't really correspond to the original panels. And so this one, reorienting everything back again, and this is what this one looks like now after all the varnish and all the panels are reoriented back together again. We actually just put out a blog yesterday on the library blog showing the sequence of this map getting treated too, so you could see a little more detail if any of you are interested. So this one is one I'm going to show a little more involvement so you can see a whole sequence in terms of how these are fixed. And this, for those of you, and I imagine many of you don't have conservators on staff, if you were to contract these out to be repaired, this is sort of what you'd see behind if you were, looking at things behind the scenes. Now, we all do these a little different, but this is a Madison County map of Indiana, Madison, Indiana from 1866. And it's pretty filthy. This was not in the original list of treatments that were planned out, but it was discovered and it couldn't really even be handled. And so this is what it looked like when it came to the lab and it was unrolled. It was pretty scary and was pretty filthy. You could run your finger across it and your finger would turn black. It was pretty bad. So I'm going to walk you through the sequence of how this one was fixed, and this is how we generally fix most of them. We did, I think, 14 of these maps last year, and so they were all generally kind of treated the same way. So this is what you're seeing here is a piece of equipment that we got last year. This is what's called a suction table. It's a larger version of that suction platen I had shown earlier. That vacuum on the right is a little different from your standard vacuum in the sense that it has two hoses, one that goes to the vacuum and the other one that is an exhaust hose. So I can use it with things that don't smell good, and I can vent them out into we have a fume hood that I can vent into. So what you're seeing here is the map face down on a suction table on top of that table. And what you're seeing here is I'm applying solvent. This is actually alcohol. It's denatured alcohol through the map because that varnish is soluble in alcohol. And so what we can do is apply that alcohol through the back of the map, which goes through the fabric, through the paper, and pulls that varnish out of the map and into the blotter underneath. And so what you're seeing in this picture, in these two pictures, is all of that varnish coming out of the map and pulled into that blotter underneath, which is just a sacrificial sheet of paper. After the varnish has been removed, the map is washed in our large sink, and very carefully, as it's being washed, it's being supported by a sheet of plexiglass so that I can lift it out of the sink as a single unit without pieces moving around. And what you're seeing here on the left is, as it's being washed, I'm very carefully misting it with a sprayer while slowly, and very carefully brushing off the dirt off the map. And you're seeing a sequence here. This is a sort of a clean area versus a dirty area. This is the cleaning of the map. This takes course over almost an entire day. And slowly you're seeing the map kind of get cleaned up. Once the map is, all that dirt's removed, then the map is put face down and the old original fabric is very carefully peeled off. Now, a lot of this is based on the concept of making sure all of those little pieces don't move, because, as I said, that fabric is the only thing holding everything together. So once you take the fabric off, it becomes 1,000 little pieces that move around. So the most important part about this whole sequence is making sure everything stays in its correct spot. And so here I am face down with a pair of tweezers, pulling that fabric off and making sure everything stays in its correct spot. And so you can see that this is the map without all of its fabric. And on the right side, you can see all of those pieces needed to stay in their correct spot throughout the entire course of the treatment. So after that, the large sheet of Japanese tissue is pasted out, and on the left-hand side, you can see me pasting it out, and on the right-hand side, I've laid down the tissue, and I'm applying pressure to make sure the tissue is adhered to the map. This is all done face down, and now the map is dried out between wool felts. I love this image. This shows the one on the image on the bottom, well, on the left-hand side, which is the bottom of the map, is the image that the piece that's already been treated next to the one that hasn't been treated yet. So you can see the comparison of one treated versus the other one. And this is the map now. As before, we've left it as two pieces for storage purposes. It is a lot more stable now. And a lot cleaner. You know, we're good, but we're not miracle workers. Usually I can get out a lot of the staining, but so this way you can see what's involved. And as before, I showed this image earlier. This is the conservation intern Lily. Now that the map's been fixed, it's now been put into a custom Mylar sleeve and gone back into the drawer in our map storage room for long-term storage, and it will eventually get digitized and be put on our online catalog. So that kind of concludes my presentation. I thank you all, and I look forward to any questions you guys have.
Okay, Seth, I'm going to go back through the questions. The first question was, how long did it take you to do the picture of the Statue of Liberty?
It was a little tricky because COVID last year only allowed us to be in the lab, only allowed me to be in the lab 2 days a week, and the other 2 days I work from home. So that was probably about a week, maybe 3 to 4 full days of cumulative work. Most of the time is spent getting all that adhesive out. Unfortunately, you can only make chemistry move so quickly, and a lot of things, there's not really a faster way of doing it, and that staining only comes out so fast. So that was most of the time was spent taking that staining out. The rest of it is a couple of days worth of work.
Okay, so what was the intention of the silk binding initially? Was it just to help hold everything together?
That's a very good question. This is something that I unfortunately have seen quite a number of anomalies in our collection. Typically, silking was a very common thing before Mylar was invented, and I know you're speaking specifically to the edging. I'm going to sort of reference silking in general. Silking was before Mylar and polyester film was available. It was very common to do silking. You would glue silk to different areas of paper to hold pieces together. In the case of that map, silking was used to protect the edges. Usually it's glued on, sometimes it's sewn on. Sometimes it's also used as an aesthetic choice with maps to, often you see silk that's red or pink or blue. It's used as kind of an accent. We're actually finding a lot of the maps in our collection were silked not just on the edges, but the whole map, meaning I didn't show this and you can see it on one of the blog posts, but we're finding a lot of maps where they would glue silk to the whole front of the map, and which has made it much more complex to treat. But it's partly from a early perception of preservation and also from an aesthetic choice.
Okay. I'm going to do this question, but after the question, I'm going to go ahead and put up the LEU certificate so you guys can download that while Seth is finishing up. But the next question is, was pure acetone used to remove the fabric and tape? And does acetone ever remove the print or the ink?
That's a very good question. So the fabric and the tape are two different things. So the tape, the acetone was used to not remove the tape, but use the adhesive that was part of tape. Is more than one thing. It's usually consists of what we call a carrier, which is in the case of cellophane, in a case of Scotch tape, is that cellophane layer, and masking tape, it's paper, and then there's an adhesive layer. The acetone is used, and it's not always acetone. Sometimes it's other solvents. It's used to remove the old adhesive from the paper. So that's it. But in terms of your second question, will it remove media and pigments? It's very possible, but this goes, and I didn't talk about this, and I should have. Before I can do any treatment, there's an extensive amount of testing that has to happen before I come up with a plan for any piece. And so before I proceed with any treatment, all the inks are tested with everything that I'll be working with throughout the entire piece. So in the case of that piece, which is primarily printed black ink, it didn't have any effect. Acetone had no effect. So I knew that I could remove that adhesive without affecting the pigment.
Okay. The next question is it true that if you laminate a piece of paper or a photograph, that it's damaging to that paper?
Absolutely. Lamination is horrible, but I want to be very distinctive about the difference between lamination and encapsulation. They're two different things. Lamination is gluing film to your paper. Encapsulation is just another type of a sleeve or a folder. Sleeves are good. We like sleeves. We like sleeves made out of polyester film or other types of inert types of films. We like sleeves. We don't like laminations. Laminations are very difficult to undo.
Okay. Barbara asked, is there a cost to Indiana Public Libraries to have something repaired?
Well, as a state library, I get this question a lot. I've had the unique experience of working for other states as well, and this comes up frequently. Our collection and my job are really for the state collection. It's part of our mandate. We can only work on things within the library that belong to our collections. We're not really set up to work on outside material. So we don't really have an external services program for treating material that doesn't belong to the state library. Now, that's just for the repair end. Part of my job is not just repair, it's also outreach and advisement. So while I'm limited by what I can repair in terms of other people's collections, I am always available to advise people for things regarding their collections. So I do get lots of calls regarding from libraries and individuals regarding preservation issues, disaster issues. So while I can't fix your stuff, I can advise you on ways to help repair, and I can also point you in the right direction if you do need things that do need to be repaired.
Okay, and that question leads into the next question. Do you offer classes or training for Evergreen Libraries as far as preservation?
I have not, but I have done lots of training before. I would not be opposed to the idea, but I think a lot of it would need to be determined what we're going to be doing the training on. But I'd be happy to talk with you guys about that
Okay.
at a later point.
That sounds good. You're getting lots of great comments. Thank you. Great webinar. This is amazing. And there's a lot more, but there's another question. Let's see. What sort of work were you able to do remotely?
That's a very good question. Where I do have a setup at home that I was able to, under normal circumstances, I wouldn't have done this, but this last year was kind of an anomaly, and so I was able to take, with permission from the librarians that oversee their collections, I was able to take pieces home to work on. It's not something I felt really comfortable doing, but last year was kind of an anomaly for everyone, and so in terms of what I could do remotely, quite a bit. I have a similar setup at home that I do have at the library, but that's not the case for a lot of other conservators, though. So generally, conservators are tied to their labs, and a lot of my friends who work in a lot of other institutions were not able to take pieces home. This was just a unique circumstance.
Okay. What core basic steps should be taken to repair or prevent damage to special collections that we as public librarians can manage?
So I think right now the thing that given everything that's been happening in Texas and throughout the South, I can't say strongly enough how much and stress how important it is to have a disaster plan. I think that, I mean, there's damage that is truly catastrophic, and then there's damage that is incremental over time. You don't want to be in a situation with catastrophic damage. If you're working at an institution that does not have, or you have not talked about a disaster plan, I cannot stress how important that is to have that in terms of large scale prevention. In terms of collection issues, things like that, I think usually I would say storage is the most crucial one. Folders, boxes. A lot of the damage that I see comes from just simply bad storage, bad handling, things like that. That's your first line of defense. After that, then you can start to kind of narrow down your priorities. But I would say in terms of the two biggest ones are storage and disaster planning, I think are the two ones that come to mind right now. The rest of it is, you can go into at a later point, you can sit down and focus, you can deal with single items, but nothing is worse than having a catastrophic disaster.
Okay, that sounds like a good topic for another webinar, Seth. Also, what point should public libraries consider sending items in special collections to a professional to repair?
Yeah, I didn't talk about this too much at the beginning, and I could spend I think this is an important thing to talk about for two reasons. One, at what point should you determine something should be sent off? It's really at a point where the piece can no longer serve the role that it needs to serve. It can't be handled. It can't be digitized. That would be the point where I would say, all right, it's time to really have something looked at. But this goes also into a second issue, which I didn't talk about, and I kind of should mention, is in terms of what we consider to be a professional. And I'll talk briefly about this, give you the 30-second purview on this. The U.S. does not, unlike other areas of the world, the U.S. does not have a national certification system for conservators. We've tried over decades and it just hasn't happened. So anyone who claims they're quote unquote certified is not telling you the truth. There is no system in the US. What we do have, which is as close as you can get to that at the moment, is within our national organization, the American Institute for Conservation, there are peer-reviewed status levels, membership levels within AIC that are as close to being certified as you can get. They're not a certification, but at least it's better than nothing. And I want to point this out so that, you know, when you're looking for somebody to do the work, it's important to recognize, you know, what is considered qualified and what's not. The two status levels within AIC are really determined based on how long you've been in the field for. One is called professional associate and the other one is called fellow. And a lot of it is just simply how long you've been in the field for. But to have those status levels, you have to have been peer reviewed by other conservators, and you have to follow a strict set of rules. So, moral of the story is when you're looking for a conservator, don't use anyone who doesn't have one of those two peer reviewed status levels. The easy part about it is on that first page, that web page for AIC, there's a button called Find a Conservator, which brings you to a search engine where you can look up regionally for other conservators. In order to be listed in that search engine, you have to have been peer reviewed. So the easiest way to find a qualified conservator is to go through AIC's search engine, the Find a Conservator search engine, and that will get you to somebody who's at least qualified to do that. And if they misbehave or there are issues, there's at least an accountability process.
Okay, and I have to apologize to everyone. It looks like the date is incorrect on the LEU. I will send you a new one. I'll fix the date and send it with the follow-up email. So don't worry about that. Also, I know we're getting down toward the end, so if you have to leave, that's fine, but we do have a couple more questions. What is an alternative to lamination for the lay person or the person in the public library?
That's a good question. Sleeves, encapsulation. You can. It's a little more involved than I can get into, but you can go onto any number of preservation supply companies like Gaylord or University Products or Talus, and buy sleeves in a whole variety of sizes. That would be the alternative to lamination, is to make sleeves. In the old days, if you wanted to make a custom size sleeve, you would cut 2 sheets of Mylar and use double stick tape to make sleeves. I don't recommend that anymore. There are other ways to do this, but unless it's a piece it's an odd size, I usually recommend just buying sleeves.
Does the Indiana State Library collection include any of the sets of maps that were pulled down like a blind, like you used to have in grade school? She said he said, my grade school in the 1950s still had a set of these mounted in the front of the classroom. So old that one map had the Russian Empire, Chinese Empire, etc. And don't know what happened to those maps.
So that's a category we call wall maps, and that's sort of a version of what I was showing earlier from the 1860s version. You know, I don't know. Actually, that's a good question. That would be a really great question to direct to our Indiana librarian, Monique Howell, because she knows almost everything. I'm just the repair person. I don't know what's in the collection. But you know, we have a pretty our map collection is a treasure chest. There's a lot in there that really has never been seen. So I would say that's a really good question to direct to our maps librarian. I just don't know.
Seth, this has been fantastic, and it's amazing the work that you do, and you're getting lots of great comments and thank yous in the chat. I know that the LEU is messed up, so I will be sending a follow-up email that will have a link to the recording, a copy of a revised LEU, and anything else that I need to send you. But anyway, Seth, this is certainly interesting. Thank you. Very interesting and informative. Thank you so much. This was a great presentation. This was awesome. Anyway, all great comments. And it was a fascinating presentation.